This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Now the backs there are. He backs it. He kicks it. Oh, the fall from Dersma. This is the speed of the culture. 3 bounces down the wing. He keeps going. 4 bounces. Joining the chorus. The Can't Lose Kangas are AFLW premiers.
Hello and welcome back once again to North Pod. The season is finally upon us. We're here. It's time for season 2025. The footy's actually started, but not for North Melbourne. We will be playing next week. And this is episode 99 for me, which is kind of hard to believe. Round 1 review next weekend is going to be, unbelievably, episode 100, which is pretty exciting. So, yeah, something to look forward to. Hopefully the boys can get up for a win as I raise the bat. Let's talk about this week's episode. I'm going to be going through, my expected or my predicted round 1 team, and then also have a look at what I kind of think it should or it might look like in terms of the best 23 if everyone's fit. We'll have a chat a little bit about the game against the Dogs this coming weekend, and that'll close it out, and then we can get into game reviews as we start playing out the season. So let's jump right in. All right, let's start with my predicted best 23, or my predicted, who I think is going to take the field against the Dogs, and I guess why. I think in the preseason, Clarko and the coaching group gave us a pretty good understanding of, who's in contention for the round 1 side. They pretty much played, the probables in the intra-club, and then the 2 games against Melbourne and then West Coast. The probables more or less stayed the same, with a couple of those more fringe players subbing in and out at various times. So I think we got a fair idea of where Clarko's head's at. I think the defence is relatively set. I guess we'll start there. Charlie Comben, Aidan Corr and Griffin Logue, I'm tipping, are the 3 taller defenders. I guess you can position them in any place really, but I think Aidan Corr and Griffin Logue are playing more lockdown roles on the tall forwards for the opposition, the first and the second banana, and then Charlie Comben ideally is playing on the third, or if they don't have a third, is trying to play loose. And either way, I think he's trying to play loose. We've seen time and time again that Chom plays his best footy in the defensive half if he's able to come across as the spare, play that, I guess, kind of Jake Lever role. He's certainly not at the level of Jake Lever yet, but that's the kind of role that we're trying to free him up. I think when he has to play on the second tall, we've just seen it doesn't go well. I think of Sam Day in that Gold Coast game last year. He's not quite up to it in defensive work. Not even not quite up to it. He's not up to one-on-one defensive contests. At the moment, he's one of the worst, if not the worst, one-on-one defender in the competition in terms of tall. So that's, I think, how we start. It's pretty unlikely that we see anyone else in those key defensive posts like Toby Pink, Callum Dawson, Will Dawson, Matt Whitlock. I just can't see us playing any of those players at this stage in round 1, and I think we have to play the 3 talls. I mean, Jamara Ugle-Hagan won't be playing, but there's still Sam Darcy and Aaron Norton down there. So, if you're playing Aidan Corr and Griffin Logue on those 2, and then you've got Chom to come across as the third. So I think they're the 3 talls. I think the other defenders, or the mediums and smalls, we're going with Jackson Archer, Caleb Daniel, and I do think we see Luke McDonald in round 1. I know there'll be some fans that don't want to see him in the side. I think for right now he plays, and I think we reevaluate as the year goes on. The fact that he's stepped down from the captaincy, I think, does speak to the fact that he knows and the club knows that there is probably a timeline on how much longer he plays for. But I certainly think, and I certainly expect him to start the season. I think it's very unlikely that he goes from being co-captain to not in the side in round 1. And, I think his preseason was up and down. I don't think that he had a good game against the Eagles. I thought he was okay against Melbourne without setting the world on fire. And, the intra-club is whatever. But Yeah, I think he plays round one. The fact that he's not going to have to play on Cody Waitman is a big win for us. And I think he definitely plays. And then I also think that Darcy Tucker will kind of be that seventh defender off the bench. We know he's a flexible player. He can play wing and half-back. So I think that most likely is the back seven. Charlie Comben, Aiden Core, Jackson Archer, Caleb Daniel, Griffin Logue, Luke McDonald, and Darcy Tucker. No real surprises there. I don't think anyone's going to be too surprised to see those seven as the ones that are selected. Zach Fisher, I don't think is going to be ready, but the fact that he hasn't played any of the preseason games, I don't think he's in contention. And I understand he was spending at least some of his preseason time in the forward line anyway. Dill Stevens is mostly on the wing, but he can go back. I think I'll get to him later on, but I think Finn O'Sullivan can spend some time at halfback, but I've placed him elsewhere. So yeah, I think that's the back seven. I think maybe we'll go to the forward line now, just to, mix things up, keep you on your toes. Again, not a lot of surprises here. Paul Curtis, well, maybe we'll start with the tools. I think we play Larkey and Darling as the two tools, and then Cam Zurhaar as that third tall-ish player. Again, no surprises there. I can't see Bryn Teakle making his way in based on the preseason that Jack Darling's had, and I guess what we've seen in those preseason games. Been super impressed with what Jack Darling has been able to do. What I would say, though, is I'm waiting to see the impact that it could have on the other players in the forward line. I think we've seen, in the game against his former club, West Coast, he was able to mark the ball really well. I think he took 8 or 9 marks. He was able to play that backup ruck role really well as well, which is super important. You need someone, I think, that's at least, going to go in there and compete. You don't necessarily need a second ruck that's going to dominate. I don't think many sides have that. Sure, maybe you look at Fremantle with Darcy and Jackson, but I mean, how often are they both playing as well? Anyway, so I think it's important that he can go in there and compete. He doesn't need to dominate. But what I am looking for is the impact that Jack Darling hopefully is going to have on the rest of our forwards in either freeing them up, creating space for them, or if Jack Darling's getting off the chain and someone else is a little bit more quiet, so long as the goals are being scored, I guess. So that's one to watch, but I think they're the two tools with Cam Zurhaar as the third. I think Paul Curtis obviously picks himself on a half-forward flank. He can also play that deeper forward role. We see sometimes when Jack Darling or, whoever the other ruck is, but in this instance, when Jack Darling goes into the ruck, you kind of want to see Nick Larkey move a bit up the ground and be that target that's leading up the ground, and you need someone to stay home. And Paul Curtis, because he is quite he's a unique player. He's a smaller player, but plays really strong. He's a great mark. Yeah, he's great at as that deep forward. But what I would like to see more of him doing is that crumbing work now that we've got two genuine marking targets as well as Cam Zurhaar. So Paul Curtis picks himself. I think the small forward or out-and-out small forward option has to be Robert Hansen Jr. I'll put my hand up. I didn't see it with him last year. Obviously, he finished the season strongly, but it was only strongly relative to what we've seen from him in the past. It wasn't as though he was torching the opposition, but he played a couple of good games late and won himself a contract, and I think for right now he's the best option that we've got as a small forward. Jacob Constanti, although he gave it his absolute all, and I think we can see they're totally different types of forwards. I just think we need Robert Hansen Jr.'s skill set a little bit more. He's a great inside 50 kick. If he gets the opportunity, we saw him do that a few times. He had a lovely inside 50 kick to Cam Zurhaar in that game against West Coast. Obviously, he's got some real pace about him, and he does have some craft. He can read a pack. Physicality is something that he lacks. He's always going to be a slight frame, so that's something that, that's just who he is. But I think he's earned his spot at least for round one. Constanti put a lot of pressure on. He's a great tackler. He loves going for a smother. I just would love to see a little bit more of a goal threat. He doesn't need to be scoring 2 or 3 a game, but I think he needs to be good for a goal a game. And he hasn't scored a goal for us he might have scored one in the intra-club maybe, but he certainly hasn't been, a lively type in terms of scoring a goal. He's created a contest a couple of times, but yeah, I think I think based on the amount of midfielders we're going to select, I think we can only have one of the two. So it's Robert Hansen Jr. for me. And then I think the other forwards, are going to be resting midfielders. So I've got Luke Parker on a half-forward flank starting. Obviously, whether or not he starts there, I don't know. There's a good chance that he starts directly in the middle, but there's going to be a rotation of midfielders that go through there. So I think we only pick the 5 genuine forwards, and then we rest some of the mids, Luke Parker being one of them. He's going to be really interesting to see what he can bring this year. Luke Parker, 3 or 4 years ago, was one of the best midfielders in the comp. I'm not going to stand here and say that, he was in the top 2 or 3, but he's an absolute bull, and he's a really consistent player, a real likeable bloke as well. Obviously, he's on the other side of his prime, but I still think he's got a few good years left in him. And I just hope that we can see a little bit more from him than we saw in the 2 pre-season games, the intra-club and then the scratch match against Melbourne. Obviously, he didn't play against West Coast, so pretty hard to assess him in that one. But I think I'd like to see a little bit more from him in terms of his capacity to damage forward and in the midfield. We just haven't quite seen it from him in those 2 scratch matches. I'm sure, this is a guy that's done plenty of pre-seasons. He will come good come the season. I have full faith. But I think he is one that I think should be going for a goal and a half or at least a goal a game, because I expect him to play a fair bit of forward line time. So super exciting to have a guy come across from Sydney with a lot of experience, premiership player, played in several more grand finals, and I can't wait to see what he can bring. So obviously a walk-up start for him. Next up, maybe we'll have a look at the wings. So no surprises here. Bailey Scott and Colby McKercher. Bailey Scott you can lock in for a wing. And to me, it looks as though, in the preseason, he also looked to play a bit more of a front half winger, if that makes sense. He's more kicking inside 50. Don't know how I feel about that. He's not a great inside 50 kick. He's a good penetrating, deep kicker, but not necessarily a precise kicker. He'll be on a wing. Colby McKercher is one that I would like to see kicking inside 50 more. I think he will spend a lot of time on the other wing. And I think, he's going to be a pretty flexible player this year. I don't expect to see him playing full games at half-back, but I do expect to see, every now and then he might go to half-back and provide another rebounding option, maybe Caleb Daniels having a stint on the bench, or potentially it's not the worst thing to have a couple of distributors back there, so long as you're not giving up too much defensively. And I thought Caleb Daniel actually brought a fair bit defensively in that game against West Coast. So there, I think the 2 primary wings. Off the bench, I think the other one is obviously going to be Finn O'Sullivan. I mentioned Darcy Tucker earlier as well. He can definitely play some wing time if required, but I think Finn O'Sullivan is going to be the other one. Probably McKercher and O'Sullivan are going to sort of rotate their way through wing and half back. Bailey Scott, I think, will mostly play on the wing, but again, who knows? Stranger things have happened. Bailey Scott didn't have an amazing year last year, like he's had some previous years. We know he finished top 3 in our best and fairest in 2022 and 23, but 24... a little bit more of a down year for him. So, I think the 3 of them will spend the bulk of the time on the wing, with Darcy Tucker filling some gaps when required. And then, we get to the midfield. And I've selected Bryn Teakle as the ruckman. Just let that one sink in and process. Hopefully everyone's got the joke there. I definitely have not selected Bryn Teakle. Tristan Xerri obviously gets the spot as the ruckman. I think he will ruck 85% of the game, closer to 90% potentially, depending on how the rotations work. And we'll see Jack Darling head into the ruck on other occasions. I don't mind the idea of seeing Nick Larkey taking some ruck contests inside 50, like we've seen someone like Tomahawk do. But I certainly don't want to see Nick Larkey going into a centre bounce or taking a ruck contest up on the wing. That's really all I want to see him doing. So Tristan Xerri, going to back up from last year. He seems to be easing himself into the season. I thought his intra-club was okay. I thought his scratch match against Melbourne was okay. And then he played some really good minutes against West Coast and against Flynn. So Tristan Xerri obviously gets the ruck spot. And then the midfielders, I've got starting on the ground, but again, there's obviously going to be rotations through Jai Simpkin, Luke Davies-Uniacke, and Harry Sheasel. And then off the bench, Tommy Powell and Will Phillips. So you can see there, and I also mentioned earlier, Luke Parker is at half forward. So I've listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 6 midfielders there. It'll be interesting to see what that mix is like, because it's probably one too many. But I think we'll probably start this way, and then when someone like George Wardlaw comes back and some other players get fit, we see if we go down to 5. I guess the way I'm looking at it, I think that Luke Parker and Jai Simpkin are more or less going to... I don't think there's going to be too many times where the two of them are in the midfield together. I think one's going to be in the midfield and one's going to be at the forward line. And I mean, we've seen so many times, someone like Harry Sheasel might start the centre bounce at half forward and then essentially move into the midfield from there and play as an extra mid. So I think it's important to recognise that the way that they start at a centre bounce doesn't necessarily mean that that's the way that they're structuring up after that point. I think that's part of the reason that we're thinking we can play an extra mid maybe, is because we're going to see some forwards push up to the contest and create an extra midfielder. So there's the 22. And then I guess I should touch a little bit more on some of them. So Jai Simpkin comes straight back in, played an elite game in that Indigenous All-Stars game. And I think hopefully he's put the concussions behind him and he can have a massive year. I think we know that, he's been a little bit down the last couple. This will be his 3rd year as captain. I think it's time for him to, I guess, be comfortable with that level of leadership. He doesn't need to be our best midfielder, but he does need to be a good midfielder, and I think he can do that. LDU, we know what he's going to bring in, and hopefully he's going to have a massive contract year. Shees, I think, like I mentioned, he will spend some time in the forward line. Who knows, maybe he'll also float back, depending on how our defensive transition's going, because we know that he can do a good job of that if required, but I think we'll see mostly him through the middle. Tommy Powell and Will Phillips are interesting. I think Tommy Powell can play forward. I don't think he's as good a forward player as Simpkin and Parker are, but I think of the mids, he's probably the next best. That being said, we have seen a little bit of LDU playing deep forward. It's something that he did, I'm thinking what year it was. I feel like it was David Noble, but it may have been Reece Shaw. And I just remember some talk around the fact that he really wanted to be a full-time mid, and we made the choice to put him in the full-time mid after that, and we've reaped the benefits from that. So, that's a long time ago now. I think that LDU is a different player to what he was then, but I wouldn't expect, or I'm not expecting to see him play a lot of deep forward time. I think it's good as a kind of Patrick Dangerfield go and rest and potentially, expose a defender or a midfielder that might go with him. But I just can't see that as when we've got a weapon like that, I think you want to have him spending most of his time through the middle. But yeah, Tommy Powell and Will Phil, I think, are pretty much going to be in the midfield or on the pine for the most part. Will Phil, I really don't think can spend time forward. I'm just not sure that he's a damaging forward. I'm sure there'll be the odd time where he does rest forward, but I think for the most part, he's going to be in the midfield or on the bench. And Tommy Powell, I think, is similar, but we saw last year that he can be damaging forward. He's probably, I'm going around circles now. Obviously, of that bunch, I think Will Phil is the one that's probably on the most on the outer, the one that's probably likely to fall out when George Wardlaw is fit again. Look, we'll see what the side looks like and what the form looks like in the first month, because I think Wardlaw is going to miss about that amount of time. But I really do want to see Will Phil, playing midfield time and not just playing that negating role that we saw him playing at times. I think he can be a really damaging midfielder. So that's the 22. And then the sub. It's tough because I just don't know. I actually can't pick it. I think based on what we saw in the preseason, probably Dill Stevens is a shot for the sub role. We've seen him play that a couple of times last year. I just don't love the type of player that he is as a sub. Like, he's not a game breaker. He's the kind of guy that'll, rack up a few possessions, but not necessarily win or change a game. Like, he's just going to come in and replace a player. So I think he's probably the most likely. I personally wouldn't pick him. I think Eddie Ford, who we haven't seen as much of in the preseason, would be a good sub. The type of player that he is, he can play a wing, he can play half forward, and he's an energetic kind of guy. And I think he would be great as a sub. Miller Bergman, we've seen play sub once or twice. Again, he's probably fits more in the Dill Stevens category. I don't see him as someone that's a super valuable sub, but I guess that's the thing about a sub. Like, if they're that valuable, you probably aren't using them as a sub. They're in the best 22. And then Jacob Constanti is the other. So I think it's going to be one of those for that probably for me I'd be picking as a sub. Personally, I think I'd go Eddie Ford. Jacob Constanti is not a super flexible player, but at least, again, similar to Ford, he comes on, he's going to bring you some energy, he's going to change the game with the way that he tackles, and because he'd be fresh, I could see him absolutely causing some havoc. And I think the other thing is Robert Hansen Jr. is the sort of guy that if he's not having a good game, you can sub him off and sub Jacob Constanti on as a different type of forward. So that's what I personally would go. I think I'd go Ford, then Constanti, and then Dill Stephens after that. Bryn Teakle obviously is one that's probably on the fringes, but I don't think he's the sort of player that you select as a substitute. And then we haven't really seen anyone else throughout the preseason that looks like they might be a chance for the squad. I guess you could say, Luke Urquhart played some good footy in the scratch match. Riley Hardiman played some good footy in the scratch match. That's about it. I mean, Toby Pink played a bit of footy for us, but again, probably falls into that same, I don't see him as a sub type of player. So that, I think, is my prediction. I'm going to go through it again. Charlie Comben, Aiden Core, Jackson Archer, Caleb Daniel, Griffin Logue, Luke McDonald as the back six. The forward line six, Paul Curtis, Jack Darling, Luke Parker, Robert Hansen Jr., Nick Larkey, Cam Zerha. Through the middle part of the ground, ruck, Tristan Sherry, LDU, Harry Sheasel, Jai Simpkin as your starting centre bounce mids, Bailey Scott and Colby McKercher on the wings. On the pine, Tommy Powell, Finn O'Sullivan, Will Phillips, Darcy Tucker, and then I will say Eddie Ford as my sub, but I'm predicting Dill Stephens as the sub. I think, to be honest, based on what we've seen in the preseason, I've obviously selected 23 there. I would be pretty surprised if more than two of those were wrong, just again based on what we've seen. Like maybe Darcy Tucker is the sub, for example, and someone like Dill Stephens comes in properly. But again, like Darcy Tucker's been playing full minutes for the one side, so I think he's a lock as that kind of more flexible mid-sized defender who can also play on the wing. Yeah, I don't see many other options, but you never know. There might be something pulled out of left field. We might see someone like Riley Hardiman, who has played virtually no minutes for the first side, come in. You just never know. So let's change gears now. Obviously, we have some injuries to start the year off. George Wardlaw's out. Josh Goder is not yet fit. Zane Dersma has got a bit of a tweak. Zach Fisher also injured, and then Cal Coleman Jones, and Braden George, but I don't think either of them are going to be pushing for selection when fit immediately. So I thought, what does our best 23 look like when we're fit? So I do have Goder, Wardlaw, and Dersma in the side if they're fit, and I guess, you look at who's coming out. It's going to be pretty predictable, but I don't love the balance of the side. So I'm going to go through it, and I guess we'll have a chat about it. I think for me, Chom, Core, Archer, Daniel, and Logue stay in that back six, but I'd be bringing Josh Goder in place of Luke McDonald when Goder's ready and fit. So I think he's kind of the next step for our defence. He plays a similar position to Luke McDonald. He can do a little bit of intercepting. He's a good distributor, and he has some good defensive craft. Like, I think he's that perfect mid-sized defender. He's a left footer. I can't wait for him to be fit, and I really hope that he can put a full season together. Darcy Tucker, I also have moved out of the side, so I think eventually he's going to be depth, and for me, I wouldn't have him in. So coming out of defence, I've got Luke McDonald and Darcy Tucker, and I only have Josh Goder coming in, who I think would play defence. I think in this lineup that I'm going to talk about, someone like McKercher and Bailey Scott and Finn O'Sullivan are going to rotate through that back area, and that's where our substitutes are going to come from. So that's the back six. The midfield doesn't change. Bailey Scott, Jai Simpkin, Colby McKercher, Tristan Sherry, LDU, Harry Sheasel, Tom Powell. George Wardlaw comes in, and I'm moving Willfield to the sub role. Don't know that he's a wonderful sub, but I think, Wardlaw is going to come in. That's just reality. So someone like Willfield has to move to the sub. And then, if Dill Stephens or Eddie Ford or Jacob Constanti, whoever I had as that sub, are obviously no longer going to be in that sub role. And the other player that's new, I guess, going through the forward line, Curtis, Darling, Parker, Hansen Jr., Larkey, Zerha, I would be bringing in Zane Dersma. and then Finn O'Sullivan also is on the bench. So I think Zane Dersma, based on what I saw from him in the preseason game that we saw, 2 games? 1 game. 1 game, just a scratch match. He was phenomenal through the midfield and some forward line play. I think he's too good not to be playing when he's fit. So I think he comes in and he can play mostly through the forward line and then a little bit through the midfield, and eventually I'm sure we'll build him towards playing some more midfield time. But there's a bit of a logjam in there. I don't think we need to rush him in there. You could have essentially Paul Curtis, Jack Darling, Luke Parker, Hansen Jr., Larkey, Zerha and Dersma rotating through the forward line, and then Simpkin and Parker are kind of doing some swapping, and then Tommy Powell is another one that can go through the midfield. Harry Sheasel is another one that from the midfield can go and play some forward line time if you need. So the only 3 changes that I would have in terms of our best players: Josh Goda, George Wardlaw and Zane Dersma in, Dill Stevens, Darcy Tucker and Luke McDonald out, and I'm moving Will Phil to the sub. I think Eddie Ford, if we are fit, is just not quite good enough. I think that's why he's on a 1-year deal, because the club is not sure if he's good enough. Jacob Stanty could well potentially overtake Robert Hansen Jr., but at the moment he's certainly, I think, behind him in the pecking order. Zach Fisher is an interesting one, because prior to us seeing a little bit more from Hansen Jr. and getting Constanti across, last year at times I was pretty keen to see him play more of a forward line role. I don't know if he's going to do that this year. I definitely could see some scenarios where he is also playing off halfback with Caleb Daniel potentially. I just worry if you do that, you're potentially leaving yourself a little bit vulnerable, because Zach Fisher is not an amazing defender by any stretch of the imagination. So for me, I don't see him as in the best side right now, but I also acknowledge that he's on a longer term deal. So I think he's going to play. He's going to get opportunities. Miller Bergman, I don't rate. Sorry about that, but I just don't see it for him. I think we have better halfback options. And I think Bryn Teakle is going to be sitting on the pine most of the year unless we're giving Jack Darling a rest. In which case, we saw from the second half of last year, Teakle can definitely come in and play a role. Just going through some of the other players, I mean, Matt Whitlock will be there in time. Luke Urquhart, I honestly, there's every chance that he plays some games this year. He looked fantastic in the intra-club, but, based on right now, I think there's definitely midfielders ahead of him. Riley Hardiman, I think he's going to play some footy this year for North Melbourne. I know he played the 3 games last year, and I'd love to see him play some more. Again, I just think I have Goda ahead of him at the moment, but who knows what kind of player we're going to see Goda be after his Achilles. You just never know what that can do to a player. Will Dawson, I put him in the same category as Matt Whitlock. We're just not going to see him for large periods this year, I don't think, but if Core or Logue or even Chom get injured, we could see one of those two get some game time. Cal Coleman-Jones is super interesting to me, because I think there's every chance that when he is fit, we give Jack Darling a rest and we see what Cal Coleman-Jones can do. He's going to have to play some VFL time first for sure. He's going to have to really get put through his paces coming back from that Achilles injury. But yeah, he's an interesting one. Coming out of contract at the end of this year, you're going to want to have a look at him, I would imagine, before potentially making a decision on his future. And really the only way to do that is to play a really tall forward line with him, Darling and Larkey, or to obviously rest Darling, you're not resting Nick Larkey. So I think that's the only option. Even if, for example, Cam Zerha was injured, I don't think you can play Darling, Larkey and Cal Coleman-Jones. I don't think. Maybe you can, but depending on who you're playing, but that wouldn't be my first choice. Geordie Payne, he's going to need to give it some time in the VFL. Toby Pink, I think we know now, is depth. Braden George, so hard to read because we just haven't seen anything from him at AFL level. He's been so unlucky with his injuries, but hopefully he will get it right this year, and if not, I think he's still contracted for another year potentially. Cooper Harvey is, he's down the pecking order now behind Hansen Jr. and Constanti, similarly on a 1-year deal, so hard to say. He didn't get a look in at all last year. I think we know what he can bring in terms of the forward output. He's a good goal kicker. He's a great mark, but just not sure if he has a big enough work rate to find his way into the side. But look, hopefully he can. Finbar Maley just needs to work on his goal kicking. Unfortunately, he's not a great kick at the moment. He's a fantastic mark, so if he can work on that, there's every chance that he could be a player of the future, but he's more of a prospect. Callum Dawson, I think, similar to Toby Pink, is going to play some depth, and River Stevens, also another one that at this stage, he's a depth player, he's a future player, and I don't expect to see him get inside, although we did see him, was a time trial or the beep test, one of those he won out, which is an amazing effort from a young player. And Taylor Goad is the one that I haven't mentioned, actually. Developing ruckman, I don't think we see him unless Tristan Sherry gets injured. And even then, we might not blood him potentially. I mean, who knows? But again, he's a ruckman for the future. I don't think you're too concerned if you don't see him this year. So that, I guess, is how I'm seeing the side going into the year. I think what's really promising now about our side is you can see how many of the players that are in our best 23 that, are on the right side, I think, of, 26, 27. Obviously, we know Jack Darling and Luke Parker are on the other side. Caleb Daniels on the fringe there. Aiden Core, I think he's 30 or 31. Everyone else, though, I've taken Luke McDonald out of the side. Everyone else is kind of sitting either in their prime or younger, and I think that's the exciting thing. The players that are on the fringe are also players that, potentially development prospects or guys that we've only recently drafted. So I think you can see where our list build is at. Obviously, we wait to see what the season actually holds for us because everything's great in theory right now. We've got a really exciting young group right now until we actually play the games, and we're concerned about how they're going. I mean, look, one thing that does concern me, and it's a big concern I think for us moving forward, our defensive running is something that our midfield really needs to work on. I think part of the problem is when you get these mids that are high draft picks coming in with some really great offensive capabilities, oftentimes they don't naturally have that defensive running power or the capacity to, or the want to defend, because they haven't had to do that, in juniors. So I think that's a worry. We've seen our transition defense is just awful, and we know we've got good players through there. It's just whether or not they have that defensive want and craft. And I guess when you think about the names, Jai Simpkin, Luke Davies-Uniacke, Harry Sheasel, Will Phillips, Tom Powell, none of them strike you as absolute defensive bulls. Luke Parker, you do. He's a fantastic tackler, and he's not quick, but he'll hound you. And obviously George Wardlaw, who's currently out of the side, a fantastic defensive midfield type, but probably just missing one or two of those more defensively minded midfielders. That's something to watch with our list build. I think now we've got a good group of younger, taller prospects. Charlie Comben, can play either end of the ground. He's playing down back at the moment. But Whitlock and Will Dawson, I think, are super exciting prospects as talls. It looks as though both of them... Well, actually, I don't know where we're going to play Will Dawson this year in the VFL, but I think both of them are probably more likely to spend some time in defence this year. Both of them are fantastic prospects. So either end of the ground, I think, would be fantastic. And yeah, like I said, I think the profile's looking good. I guess what I would say is because our profile is so young, I think that's why my expectations are still pretty low. You might say I'm a little bit pessimistic going into the season, and I honestly hope I'm wrong. I hope we have a fantastic start to the year, but I think it's going to be a slow start. I think it's not going to feel that different to last year as we get going, but I think second half of the year, I think our players, they're going to click into gear. I think we're going to see the benefit of someone like Darling and Parker and Caleb Daniel coming in. I think it's going to take them a little while to gel and to absolutely sing with the players that they're playing with, but yeah, I do think it's going to happen. I do think this year we're going to see some improvement. I suppose I spoke about that in my over-unders, that I am expecting our percentage to increase. I'm expecting more wins. I don't expect to see that happening immediately to start the year. I guess let's look ahead to the first game now against the Dogs. So we're playing the Dogs in round one, and I'm sure you're across the fact that the Dogs are missing quite a few first-choice players. I'm sure I'll miss some, but Jamara Ugelhagen, Cody Waitman, Marcus Bontempelli, Liam Jones, I don't think Bailey Dale is available either. So there's definitely going to be some younger players playing for the Dogs, and I think they're vulnerable. For me, I think now that the Bont is out, that does change things in their midfield. Adam Treloar, I think, is another that's not playing. So they're going to be missing a lot of players, and that should give us an opportunity. I just worry that the mental demons of getting belted by them so many times over the past 5 years, going in is a concern. I actually think now with that extra Bontempelli injury, I almost want to pick us to win, but I just know in my heart of hearts it's a dumb thing to say, because I've watched this side play for the last couple of weeks and haven't been blown away by what I've seen. We're definitely fitter. I think we should be competitive because they're down so many soldiers, and so many of them are dangerous players for us. Bontempelli is dangerous for anyone, but we just don't have a matchup for him through the middle of the ground. Jamari Ugle-Hagan being out means that they're not going to completely stretch us down back. There's definitely still going to stretch us with Norton and Sam Darcy, don't get me wrong, but I think playing the three of them would have made it virtually impossible. And I mean, Cody Waitman, as that smaller player, small forwards tend to torch us, so the fact that he's not available. Liam Jones, another one that's super dangerous as that Charlie Comben type interceptor, a real wall. So look, there's a lot to look forward to and a lot to be, I guess, optimistic about, because I think we should be competitive. Ultimately, I just can't quite see us, due to that mental fragility, I think. I just can't see where we score enough goals. I can't see us not making the same mistakes that we've made over the past couple of weeks against Melbourne and the Eagles. So call me a pessimist, because I am. I don't think we're going to get the chocolates, but I do think it's going to be close. And I think at least if it is competitive, it gives us some hope going into the year. I think we just want to see, some competitiveness. We want to see our side not be out of it at three-quarter time. So many times over the past couple of seasons, we've kind of hung in for a quarter and a half, maybe up to half time, and then that premiership quarter, the third quarter, we've been blown away. So that's what I would like to not see. I'd like us to be in the game at three-quarter time and, maybe even sneak a win. And wouldn't it be such a great pressure release if we were able to get our first win out of the way? I think we all remember how we felt in 2023, winning those first two games. It gave us a fair bit of optimism, I reckon for the first couple of months. Like, even though we obviously dropped off and ended up not winning a game for a long time, I think those two wins, against those Perth sides, at least gave us a bit of confidence that we could compete. That confidence quickly dwindled. So you can't leave it too long between your wins for it to have an impact, but we just got to start being actually competitive and start threatening for some wins. So I'm predicting a tight loss, I think, but I certainly hope to be wrong. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to playing some real footy where there's no more of this, take it with a grain of salt, or it's just a pre-season game. I'm looking forward to seeing some real football that we're judging on its merits. And yeah, looking forward to seeing some of these younger players. I cannot wait to see Finn O'Sullivan play his first AFL game. Can't wait to see Caleb Daniel, Luke Parker and Jack Darling play their first games in North Melbourne colours. And who knows what else we might see. Potentially we see Jacob Constanti. He's one that I'm excited to see, even though I'm not expecting to see it right now. And Wilfield, I've got my eyes on him. I really am rooting for him. I want him to have a fantastic year, and I really want him to have some success whilst George Wardlaw is out of the side, because I think if Wilfield's not firing and he's not playing well when George Wardlaw is ready to come back, that it's going to make it really hard for him. And so yeah, that is a look ahead to next week, and I guess a look at my best 23 or my predicted 23 for the Western Bulldogs game. I would love to hear your thoughts. Let me know who I'm wrong about. Who should we be playing in round one? And who have I missed out of the best 23 when we're fit? I'm sure there'll be some people happy that I've dropped Luke McDonald out. I'm sure there'll be some people that aren't ready to see someone like Zane Dersma or Josh Goda playing. So yeah, let me know your thoughts. Who should I replace them with? Who do you see as our current best 23 when we're fit? And yeah, thank you so much for listening. Cannot wait to podcast next week for episode 100. Please, help me celebrate next week. Share out the podcast. I'd love to get as many North Melbourne fans on board for season 2025. And yeah, I hope you have a fantastic week. Let's chat next week after we've played our first game for the season. As always, go North! Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at NorthPod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.